My guest today is one of the world's most prominent, most controversial public intellectuals. Noam Chomsky, the internationally renowned professor of linguistics, published his first critique of American politics and foreign policy 40 years ago. Back then, he was fired up by the war in Vietnam. Today, he is still raging against America's malign influence. The world has changed a lot in 40 years. Has Noam Chomsky changed too? Professor Noam Chomsky, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
It is 40 years since you published your first real political book in the United States, and an awful lot has changed in the world in 40 years. Has your political worldview changed as well, do you think?
My worldview is not very different from the first article I wrote, which was in 1939, fourth grade newspaper, of which I was the editor and only reader. So it was an article on the fall of Barcelona and the rise of fascism.
And the danger of fascism spreading through Europe.
I mean, I wouldn't endorse what I said in 1939, but it's the same point of view.
And I've seen you describe yourself, the young Noam Chomsky, as an anarchist. What does that mean? I mean, when you look at politics today, you live in the United States, you consider democracy as done in the United States, and you look at the US role in the world, what does it mean to be an anarchist?
Well, I can only repeat what I've written. Anarchism is a very broad brush, covers lots of things. But there are some leading principles, I think. The main one is that is a skeptical attitude towards authority and domination, and the recognition that any form of domination, hierarchy, control has a burden of proof. It's not self-justifying. It has to demonstrate that it's legitimate, just as any use of force or coercion does. And it therefore deserves to be challenged. And if it's challenged and it cannot justify itself, it should be dismantled.
And when it comes to political governance, does democracy have a place in your view of how human beings should organize their society?
Yes, I think democracy should be the ideal to which an anarchist system would strive. And in fact, its critique of contemporary systems would be that they deviate so radically from any acceptable notion of democracy.
Would you say, here in 2009 with Barack Obama, President of the United States, that America has a surprisingly resilient, functional democracy?
On the other hand, I would say that the Obama election reveals, even more dramatically than in the past often, how deeply flawed the democratic system is, and in fact was designed to be flawed, and pretty much the way it is flawed.
Why do you say that the election of Obama makes that even more obvious?
Well, why did Obama win? There are basically two reasons. One, he had enormous support from the financial institutions. That's the core of his funding. And the financial institutions are by now the essential element of the economy since the financialization of the economy in the 1970s.
Well, if I may, let me stop you there, because you've chosen to begin by talking about the financing of Obama's politics. But Obama raised money in a completely different way from any politician in America before. I looked at the figures, something like $275 million of his campaign war chest came from donations of $200 or less. Well, this is Americans, ordinary Americans,
yeah,
3 million of them.
Well, first of all, one has to be very careful about evaluating those figures, but let's assume it to be true. It's like saying that the stock market is democratic because everyone has 3 stocks in a pension fund.
Do you see Obama simply then as a tool, as a puppet of big business?
Tool, it essentially shares the same values, I assume.
I listen to you and I get the sense that you feel, frankly, that Obama really doesn't mean very much, signify much in terms of any change in America. But it's not just about Obama, because if one looks at the way American society works, the way information flows, things are very different from the way they were when you started to become a prominent political critic in the 1960s. I just think of the internet, of the way in which, quote-unquote, citizen journalism is changing the way in which information flows between people and power. Does this not matter?
I think the internet is a wonderful tool. Does it affect power? Marginally.
Well, surely it does, because you're famous for using Lippmann's quote about the media manufacturing consent and developing that idea. And to quote you, propaganda is to democracy what the bludgeon is to a totalitarian state.
That's correct.
But these things don't really work so easily. That idea seems less powerful when
it's more diffuse. So the internet is a kind of a blunt instrument. It's a cult generator. Anybody can put up anything they think. That's nice.
We're talking about the internet and whether it changes the nature of engagement between citizen and power. We got a host of questions put to us for you from viewers over the internet, and I'm going to put one to you now. It's from Philip Lindström in Sweden, and his question is this. Professor Chomsky, how important do you consider the internet will be as a tool of democracy and for democracy in the coming decades? He says, we've already seen content control and net censorship rising. Governments try to monitor, in certain situations, net traffic. He says, so are the golden years of whistleblowing and independent media online already behind us?
I don't think they're behind us, because they never happened.
Never happened?
I mean, there's some, and it's fine, but no more than when Dan Ellsberg released the Pentagon Papers, which happened to be practically 40 years ago.
I've interviewed a lot of prominent writers and thinkers on this program from the left in the United States. And I'm thinking recently, Studs Terkel, we went to Chicago to interview before his death. We've interviewed Gore Vidal. A lot of figures who have a very high profile, and their voices are very well known. But it seems to me, and maybe you're in this category too, huge number of followers and supporters, but your views don't resonate on Main Street, mainstream America. Why is that?
First of all, they don't resonate in National Public Radio, the New York Times, and so on. But if Main Street means the people of the country, when I go home at night, I'll have 20 invitations on email to come anywhere. I speak at community groups, immigrant groups, labor groups. I've spoken at West Point. I mean, there's a very large number of people